All right, welcome to part 2 of building this Lord of the Rings companion app. Obviously, the purpose of this series slash tutorial is less about building a really cool Lord of the Rings app that, sounds kind of like it could be a game or something like that. It's really just about learning patterns in state management with a fairly exciting concept for those who are interested in this content, Lord of the Rings. I'm just going to do a quick review of kind of the files we've essentially set up in this last little bit. We have the main, we set up sort of like our main stuff. We have our root screen. That's basically just a tab screen. Our third tab is the quote screen, which the quote screen itself is literally just doesn't do anything other than say characterless screen. Where we've been spending most of our time is building our quote store. So we have a common folder within store, which has our response model, which is kind of like the pagination and results list right here. We made a simple little API repository that's an abstract class that we intend to inherit, which has stuff like our getter, does our authorization stuff, that kind of thing. What else we have? Then we have our quote model, which essentially has just the ID and dialogue objects. There was a couple other things that we omitted for now because they're not super useful to us, at least yet. We also have the quote repository. This is what extends that API repository and makes specifically a GET request when we're fetching quotes to /quote. The last few things we did was set up our event. So we have a quote event, which is also abstract, meaning we'll never instantiate it on its own, but we've created two empty events, just quote fetched and quote reset fetched. Other than that, the last thing we did was create our quote state. This kind of manages the shape of our how we want to be representing our state. So we have quotes, we have a status, we have what page we're on, how many pages there are in the resource. We also have this thing called appended quotes, and that's just going to keep track of every time we do make another call to our API. This will just restore the most recent ones, not append on other ones, which you'll see in a bit. Okay, so that kind of gets you caught up. Again, we are using the block pattern. If we look at our YAML file, in case you are following along, we do have some things here like equatable, Flutter block, Hive block, Dio, which is our API library. Hydrated block allows us to kind of store stuff or our state locally for when the next version, when you load your app again, and then path provider, which allows us to get our temp directory to store this in. So many of these things, pretty much all these libraries here are, other than Dio, are based around using block, the block pattern, and Dio. I mean, without Dio, there'd be no way to make a network request without using Dio or HTTP or whatever else you might want to use. Okay, we're caught up. So the next thing we were going to work on was our quote block, which we've started. Something that's interesting is we've created in this file parts. This is kind of like a way that you can organize multiple files to be sort of part of the same file in a sense. So to do that, you have to say what files are supposed to be part of this. And then when you actually are looking at the file, you say part of, remember that of keyword, back a reference to that. And that allows us to, just by having this equatable, because it's included in our quote block, we have access to it. Let's close some things and let's open up our quote block again. Okay, so this is kind of where the real work is going to happen. This ties together all these things that we've just made. So we're going to create a new class and we're going to call it quote block. And it's going to extend block, extends block. And we have to say what kind of block, and in that case, or what kind of events we're going to be listening for. And in that case, we're going to listen to quote events. And what is our state object? Well, it is quote state. So quote event, that's that. And the cool thing is we're telling it we're pointing it to this abstract class, meaning any kind of events will be anything that extends that. So quote fetch, quote reset fetch, etc., etc. And similar to quote state, that's the reference to that there. This is what our state looks like. Okay. Now what we need is we need to make a reference to our repository, and it is of type quote repository, and we're just going to call it repository. Then whenever this is instantiated, we will run the constructor quote block, and in brackets we are going to say this dot repository, and then we want to run a super, and we just want to construct this quote state. Now you'll see we're getting a little bit of an issue here. It's because this is not a nullable field. We can fix that just by saying that, but we don't want this to be nullable. So instead, we're going to say required. So this is required. Okay. Now we still have some little things, but that's because we're missing some stuff here. Okay. Let us do some other things. So we need to do some. In fact, it might tell us right here. No. Okay. So we have to override something now. This is just a way, and this is kind of boilerplatey, like you don't necessarily have to understand exactly what's going on here, but we're going to essentially override Block's transform event function. So to do that, we will do an override, and it is going to return a type of stream of type transition, and we just want these to match. So quote event, quote state. Oh, okay, I typed without looking. Quote event, comma, quote state, and the name of it is transform events. Now transition comes in from Flutter Bloc. I guess we didn't have that already. Transform events, and it is going to take a couple parameters here. One of them is a stream of quote event. We'll call that events, and then a transition function. And it's literally just transition function of type quote event, relying on the quote state. And we'll call that transition. I'll just do transition function fn. Okay, then this function will return a super dot transform events, and we want to pass in those events. And then we want to pass in the first one will be our events. Our second one will be that transition function. So this is kind of similar to what we were doing before in our common observer. We're more or less just kind of creating our own thing and extending something that exists. So it could be considered a shim, because all we're really doing is, right now, this is actually not doing anything special. We can remove this and it'll work the same. But one thing I do want to show is using debouncing, because currently the way this is set up is anytime this event gets sent to, anytime we call any of the events in here, it's going to go, and not yet, but once we have the code for it, we'll hit our API, and it will just keep hitting it every time something changes, which you can get a lot of, that could bubble up really fast. So the main reason we're putting this in is I want to do a debounce. So we need another package for this. There's other ways to do debounces, but this is a good way to do it. So we're going to go flutter pub add rxdart. So if you've worked with Angular or any other RxJS sort of things, this is just reactive programming sort of stuff, and we're going to make use of that. So we can import that file. I'll just do package, it was rxdart slash rxdart. Then what we can do is, instead of just events like this, we can actually go events.debounce time and pass in a time. And in this case, I'm going to do a const of duration of milliseconds 500. And all that's going to basically do is when, if a bunch of functions if we're, say it's like we're doing a search and the text is changing, it'll wait. There'll basically be a stream of events coming in, and it will wait half a second before actually calling it. So it gives it a bit of a time. And if multiple events happen before that 500 milliseconds is up, it's only going to respect the most recent one. So it just allows us not to like overly hit the API, which is important for many reasons. So yeah, adding this, the main reason was so that we could do this debounce thing. We could just remove this and it would work just fine, but this is nice to have. Okay, so next what we have to do is override something else that our block requires us to do. So override. What we are going to be doing is, and if you've worked with Redux, this is a common pattern. You're mapping things to your state. So events are going to fire, and we want to react to those events. So the return of this is a stream of type quote state. And what we're going to call it map event to state, just as I kind of said. And what gets passed in is a quote event, and we'll call that event. And this is interesting. It's async, but it's actually async with an asterisk, so that allows us to use yield, which means it's a little bit beyond the scope of I think what I'm trying to show right now, but it's kind of tied in. Yield is kind of like returning, but it can return something that's reactive. It doesn't just return an end, it can keep returning. I honestly don't really know the best way to explain it, but it'll hopefully make more sense now. So what we want to do is switch, not switch, but we want to check what kind of event this is. So we can go if event, and we can use the is keyword and say quote fetched. So we know that a quote event is going to be passed in, but quote event is an abstract class, meaning a quote event on its own will never actually be passed in. It will either be one of these two or whatever ones we make. So luckily, we can use this is keyword, which checks essentially the class type. So we want to check if it's quote fetched, and in which case we're going to yield something. And I'll type that out in a minute. The other case that we might be checking is if event is quote reset fetched. We would also be doing something else here. And I'll just leave that one blank for now. Okay, so what we want to do is we need to make a new function. So I'll comment that out so stuff isn't broken. So we want to do something for when the fetch happens. So we're going to create a future. This is going to be a return of future, and it's of type quote state. We're working with the state a lot in here. And we're going to just call this, and it's going to be underscore because it is going to be a private method. I'm going to call it map fetch quotes to state. You'll notice, so we have map event to state, which is like a public one. This one, map fetch quotes to state. So, and we can just put this in now. We want to yield await whatever we end up doing down there. So if the quote is fetched, we want to essentially call this function and yield its results. This will be async. And there's one thing that will get passed in. It'll be quotes, an instance of quote state, and we'll just call it state. And that's basically what is the state prior to this function running? What is the state of our, not our whole application, but the quote state of at this time? And then, yeah, we're going to do some magic in here. We're going to end up returning, I'm just for now going to return state. Technically, this works because it's async, so it is going to be a future, and the quote state will be returned. So I'm going to keep it like this for now because there's a little more work we have to do somewhere else before it would even make sense to talk about that. Okay, let's see. So let's talk about the next thing. So we still have an error, I think, on this page. I'm not sure. Oh, right. You have to pass. Sorry, I have to pass in. I was wondering what that error is. Yes. Okay, yes. I remember now what we have to pass in here. So we have to pass in state here. Now, you might be, and I remember when I saw this the first time, I was a little bit like, wait, I'm confused. Where is this coming from? There's nothing in here called state. And state is actually just a public property of block. I think it's a getter, actually. And if you command click it, you'll see, yeah, it's a get of state, a return state. So we actually have access to that. So we have to pass that in for this to work, which makes sense because we said we want state here. Okay, so let's go to our quote list screen that is very fun right now. Okay, this is where it gets exciting. Okay, we're gonna start small and kind of work our way up. Let's just start with yeah. Okay, I'm going to make in the same file for now. We might move this somewhere else. I'm going to make a stateless widget called quote list. So not the screen, but the list itself. It will be we're going to convert it actually right away to a stateful widget. Inside here, we are going to essentially have our list view. Now we've seen list view.builder before, and that is perfectly fine for now, but I want to take this one step further. I want to use a package that I've used before. Okay, so this package is called Infinite Scroll Pagination. Flutter pub add infinite scroll pagination. Let's just make sure I spelled that right. I don't know if I did. It seems good. And let's just look this guy up real quick. So this is a really sweet library. It follows a very similar API to listview.builder. It has like a builder, delegate, all that kind of stuff. But it is meant for just handling all the annoying stuff with, okay, I scrolled to the bottom of the page. Now go get me the next page. You can do this, manually with a list view and have like a detector and all that kind of stuff. But I really like this library, and it does work totally fine. In fact, I even think it says in here that it works fine with, let's see, block. Yeah, look, architecture agnostic. Works with any state management from set state to block. Okay, so the way this, and we're going to kind of work backwards here because there is a bunch of learning opportunities right now. So let us get right to it. So in my list, what I'm actually going to return right now is what's called a paged list view. Okay, and it automatically puts some stuff in here and all that kind of stuff. In order to work with this, we create something called a paging controller, and we're just going to do it right in our state object right here. It's going to be a final of type paging controller, and we have to tell it what the index is, and the index in this case will be an integer. Generally would be, and then what type of model. It will be a quote model eventually, but I am going to, for now, for learning purposes, make it just a string, because that'll be easier to work with. We'll call this paging controller, and it's going to be equal to paging controller. Then we have to give it a first page key, meaning what is the first page, and it's going to be 1 in this case. Okay, so that is good, and then we'll replace this here. There's our paging controller. Then we have this builder delegate function. So this works kind of like list view builder, but it's definitely different. So let's just type some stuff here. Let's go to a new line. Okay, so our builder delegate is, we have to instantiate a page child builder delegate, and we have to say what kind of thing. Again, it would be normally a quote model, but we are just going to use string for the purpose of getting this together. Inside here, there is an item builder. Oops, item builder, there we go. And it has context. It has the quote itself, which we'll still call it quote because it will be, and then it has an index. So the difference is in list view you only have context and index. Here you actually have we're gonna have a representation of our actual quote model, or in this case just a string. And what we would return is in this case, let's just return text, and it will say it'll be quote. And that should just work because quote is a string right now. Again, it's not going to be, but we're fine. Okay, the next thing we need to figure out is how to actually get data in this thing. So, well, first off, let's put our quote list, instead of returning this text, let's actually return our quote list. And we should see that it just kind of does this thing. And even if I refresh, I think it will kind of keep spinning because there's no data, and we haven't told it to get data yet. So in order to do that, this is going to kind of be temporary because it's going to work different when we're actually working with block, but I think you have to learn how this works first. In our init state, we are going to, we're going to go, yeah, let's just do this first. Let's take our paging controller, and we're going to go dot append page. And we need to pass in some items. In this case, I'm going to just go ABC because they should be an array of strings, 1, 2, 3, foo bar. And I'll just make this 2. I'm doing this really basic right now. So essentially what we're kind of doing is when this initializes, we're going to append a page of this, and then we're going to set the next page key to 2, because right now it would be 1. And let's just see if this even does anything. Okay, great. Now, I'm not sure what this loading indicator is. I think, okay, let's just, oh, I know why, yeah. Let's just do that first. I think that'll, I just want to get rid of this loading indicator. He's annoying me. Oh, there is, oh, right, the last page is different. Come on, spinner, go away. Okay, there we go. Okay, so what we've kind of done, we're just doing this for example purposes. We're talking to our paging controller, and normally we just append page, but if we know it's the last page, we'd append last page. And I, just for sake of this example, without making array really long, we kind of need to just append the last page because it, essentially the way this works is, actually, let's just do it. What I'm going to do, we're going to break this out into a function. I'll just make it void, and we're going to call it get data. Get data. If you happen to be watching this and following along, feel free for the next couple minutes not to type any of this out because we will be erasing pretty much all of this. I'm going to make a constant, we can just do it here, const items equals this. And then I'm just going to whatever. Cool. And what I want to do is when we get data, when we call this function, we're going to pass in a page, okay? And it will be an int of page, and we'll just start it as 1 by default, and which means these have to be in a square bracket to say that it's an optional field. Then I need to remember the Dart way to do this, but I think it's dot slice. Dart select first X items in array with offset, we'll call it. So we're kind of doing a bit of a pagination thing. Wait, is this the right thing? Enumerate? No, I don't want to enumerate. I just want get first X items of array with offset. Dart. Let's add Flutter to our search. Sometimes that helps. Okay, perfect. I think get range is what we want to use. So I'm going to make a variable. This will be a final variable, not a const, called paged items. And it's going to be equal to our items.getRange. And we want to pass in our starting point and our ending point. So I'm also going to make another constant. Again, this is just for teaching purposes, called limit. And let's just do a limit of 3. So our start is actually going to be whatever our page is minus 1, right? Because we actually want to work with the 0. And then we will multiply that by limit. And then our end is actually going to be the same as this stuff here, whatever that is. And we will plus limit. And then what we actually want to do is append page items, and then do that key where it will be page plus 1. Paged items, can't be a, oh, and then at the very end of get range, we have to go to convert it back to a list. Okay, so what's kind of happening here? Maybe I can make this a little more simple. So we'll make a final variable called start and a final called end. And really end is just actually start plus whatever the limit is, I believe. And then get range, we'll just use start end. If this doesn't make perfect sense, it's not super crucial. I'm just building a simple way that I can explain how pagination works. So we would essentially pass in a page number when we get data. We have the limit hard-coded to 3. These are our items that are in it. We would want to go to the start. So we take whatever page we're on, multiply by 1. So this would now be 0 times our limit. So 0 times anything is 0. So we're starting at 0. And then our end is going to be whatever that start is, 0 plus our limit, 0, 1, 2, 3. Limit -1, I think, because we actually want 0, 1, 2. And that will get our paged items. And I'm going to make this a bunch longer. And to kind of improve stuff, instead of just text, let's wrap this in some padding of like 20 so there's space between them. Okay, refreshing. Something is kind of happening, but not. Oh, right, we have to actually, okay, get data. We actually have to call that function. And I think I am missing one other thing, but let's do get data and just see if that even does anything. So we'll refresh. I'm going to do a refresh here. And you'll see we actually have 1, 2. Okay, so maybe I should have been getting 3 things. So I think we do limit +1 there times limit. No, that's wrong. I don't need to subtract this 1 at the end to get the end. Let's just see. We should have 3 items when we go. So basically what's happening is we are getting the first 3 as per our thing, but we have no way right now to kind of like go and get the other ones. So in order to do that, we are going to, and again, this is all, if you're following, don't yet. I just want to kind of explain how this actually works. We're going to make something called fetch page, and it's going to take an int of page, which might look similar. To what we're doing, what we were just doing. Okay, so what we're going to do in here, and this is essentially the fetch page that our pagination is going to worry about. We're going to, we won't worry about that. So we're going to get our data by going equals get data, and we want to pass in that page. So that just gives us our data back. Oops, get data. Then what we want to do is essentially check if data.page is greater or equal to, now in a real API request, you would have kind of have a page and a page limit sort of thing coming back from you, which we don't actually have right now. So let's just check if page is greater or equal to, I'm just going to do 10 for now, because examples, these are all just examples. We would then go paging controller dot append last page. This is when we want to append the last page. We're like, we're at the last page, and we would put in data, which is this data here. Oh, void, this needs to return something. Instead of doing this, I am going to return paged items. And this needs to now not be void, but it's actually going to be, let's make it a future, because usually a get data would be a future. And this would be of type list string. And we'll just go async. Okay, so then we get data equals await get data. So imagine this, instead of being this silly thing we made, it's actually calling our API. And we're like, oh, we're at the last page. Okay, we're going to append last page. Otherwise, paging controller.append page, and we want to still pass in data but we want to do our next page key, and that's going to be page plus 1. Now, fetch page, we actually now in our, instead of calling get data right here, we are going to take our paging controller and we're going to add a page request listener. And all we do here is we run that fetch page function we just made and pass in page. Yeah, I'm just going to, we'll just call it page key. It doesn't matter. Okay, so this is all hooked up now. I think this will work. And see, it kind of just, it loaded that first chunk. You'll kind of see it comes in, although it's going to be really quick because there's no API call, but we could fake that by doing a couple things here. We could just do an await future.delayed duration milliseconds 500, half a second. So then it will feel more like how this would actually work. So you kind of see some comes in, some comes in, some comes in, and there we go. Something's live on prod. All right. So this isn't quite working because we don't really have any real logic to determine if it's the last page. We could do that, but it would require moving some stuff around, and this is mostly all getting removed anyways. But I do want to kind of just walk you through what's happening here. So just as a review, because otherwise I think the next stage is going to get really confusing. When we init state, we are essentially attaching our paging controller. It's listening for any time a request happens to get the new page. The way a request happens is like, it means you've scrolled to the bottom or there's still room on your screen. And that's just how this library works. Then we have this fetch page function, which in a very awful way determines is it the last page, append last page. Otherwise, append the page and also like mark it as, there's still more data. That's essentially all that's doing there. This is our fake little get data function, which is kind of useless. And will be removed. And then what is happening here is we have our page list view. We're pointing to our paging controller. And then, we're not actually, in a list view, you would normally kind of be like, quote equals whatever our like quotes are at index. And then we'd return, quote here. But this item builder actually is already passing our quote in. So it already is ready to go. Now, remember our quote is just a string. It's not an actual quote object. So that's how this library works. There's some other good things about it too. You can have there's a bunch of different builders. So there's the item builder. You can have a no more items indicator builder. So if you want to put something at the very bottom, like, oh, nope, nothing else. And all that is context. And you can, send back text that says nothing here or whatever you want. There's also stuff for when there's errors. New page, you can have a different builder for your error versus a first page error because you might want to handle it, sort of differently. There's like an empty, I think it's called no items found. If you didn't have any items, how do you want to display that? It's a really awesome, I highly recommend. I've used it on half a dozen projects. But this is the first project I've used it with, together with our, with Bloc. And we haven't got to the block part yet, but that was just a little side note. Okay, hopefully that wasn't too much of a tangent, but I do think it was pretty valuable to kind of an understanding of how this library works before we also add another complexity in. So I'm going to erase a bunch of things here, guys. Yeah, let's erase that too. And if we go back now, we should just see this will just keep spinning because it's kind of like expecting something to happen. So in order to mitigate that, let's just return, let's just go here. And for now, just return container, just so our app isn't spinning. There we go. Okay, now we actually have to do it. To figure this out, let's go back to our quote block where we've kind of have done nothing here yet. And what we're going to do is handle this thing right here. So the first thing, let's, as a reminder, and I'm gonna just make this a little bit bigger and close this. We don't really have to look at the UI right now because we're gonna be writing a decent amount of code. So let's look at our quote state again and remember what it looks like. So remember there's quote, appended quote, status page, and pages. Those are the kind of things we're gonna be working with that we want to sort of map. What we want to do at the very start is if state.page, so whatever page we're on, is greater than state.pages, We just want to return our state as is because we don't want to go off and fetch another, page of data when there isn't any there. And just as a reminder, this is coming back from our API, these two things. And we're going to be saving it here. Okay, now we want to do, and I want to wrap this into try, and we'll just put the catch before we forget, and we'll do print error, and we'll probably do something else there. But let's just have this part into try, because things can go wrong here. We're making an API call. Your network could go down. Who knows? You could get rate limited, which will probably happen throughout this because we're working with a third-party API. Okay, so the first thing I want to check is if our state.status, remember status is whether or not it's here they are, initial, success, or failure. First, we want to check to see if it's equal to initial. So if this is the first one we've made in this cycle. So if it's equal to initial, we're going to do something. Okay. And in that case, what we're going to do is we're going to make something called data be final, and we're going to await this dot repository, which because we're instantiating the repository with a quote repository, it will be a quote repository. We want to say dot fetch quotes. That's that function we made, and we want to pass in a page. And where do we get that page? Well, this is the first request. We know it's going to be, we want page 1. Okay, and remember, just as a reminder, what fetch quotes does, you essentially just pass in a page optionally, otherwise it defaults to 1. So really, like, we could actually just get rid of this. It's going to default 1 anyways, but I'll keep it there. We could also change the limit if we wanted to, but I'm happy with the limit of 20. So what it does is it goes and it calls these, our API endpoint with /quote after with those parameters, and then returns back a response list model with the page, pages, and doc. So now what we want to do is we want to return a new version of our state. So we have this state, and what we can do is we're going to go return state.copyWith. Remember, we made a copyWith function on our state, as I will show you this copyWith right here. And we want to copy with some updated values. So for instance, status is now going to be API request status.success. It was a success, and we know it is because it's in this try loop or try block. Then we want to pass in what quotes we got, and we get those from data.docs. All right. Appended quotes will actually be the same in this case. That part will make a little more sense in a bit if it doesn't yet. Page, data.page, and pages, data.pages. And this just allows our state to be updated. So now, the next time it gets called, it knows what page it's on. This will only happen once because we've now set it to this. If this gets called again, something else will happen. So we're good there. Now, if it's not initial, now we could do an else, but really we know that there's a good chance that everything is fine. What we can do is we are just going to, I'm going to copy this. So if it's not the initial, meaning it's either, and the way that this is going to roll out, it can really only mean that it's of success. So now we're on the second time. So instead of page being 1, we're going to take whatever the state.page is and add 1 to it. Then we are going to return, and I'm actually going to copy this whole thing. It's basically the same. The main difference is here is we don't want to replace our quotes, because then as you start paging, you're going to lose the ones that were there before. The whole point is that we're going to be appending these on. So we're going to make sure that these are a list by going list.of data.docs, and then we're going to go .add all. Now I'm using a two dots here, and that's just like a shorthand so that you kind of like create this, and then it's called chaining, and then we're going to add all. And what we want to add is data.docs. And add all is kind of just a helper method for it's instead of doing add multiple times for the whole array, it adds all of the things. It kind of concatenates the two arrays together. So now our quotes will be a list of, it'll be everything we had in our original thing. And I made a mistake here. This should be state.docs. So we're taking state.quotes. So we're taking our original, whatever is in the state right now, and then we're just adding more to it. Whereas appended quotes, we want to just be like this, because in this version of our state, we just want to be like, these are the ones that we just got this time, the most recent, whereas this is like our entire list. Okay, then, actually, I don't want to do this as a catch. We're just going to say on exception, and we want to still return something here. We don't want to just like print something. We're going to do state.copy with. So whatever the state is now, except we're going to update it to say status API request status.failure. Okay. Okay, that is basically it so far for this. So basically, when a quote event is fired, if the event is quote fetched, it's going to run this function. It's going to make sure that we're not above our page limit, and then we're going to run this function on the initial one, or run this other function, which is kind of the same. The main two differences are that we're incrementing the page number, and we want the quotes to be appended on like that. There's probably a way we could clean this up and combine these a little bit better, so have a little bit less duplication, but I'm not too concerned about that yet. Okay, I think lastly in this little sprint, we'll go back to our quote list screen here. Okay. This will be, there's a few things that we got to do here. Okay, so we're working in our quote list state, but let's go back to the screen itself. What we're going to do here is instead of just returning quote list right away, we're going to do some block stuff. And this is our first real we've done a lot of stuff in like the block world already. We've done some stuff in the UI world. This is where we're actually going to connect the dots between those two things. So we're going to return a block provider. And when we do a block provider, we want to say what kind it is, and it's going to be a quote block. So we do that. Now it requires a create function, which takes a context, ctx, we'll call it. And we essentially want to return quote block. So the same block we have there. We need to then point its repository, and we're going to point in quote repository. And the repository itself requires a parameter, which is our client, and our client is Dio, which is our HTTP client. Okay, then I'm just going to do semicolon here, and then what we want to do, and I'm just going to add some commas so it's a little bit more clear. Okay, so basically here we go. We have our block provider. We have this. Then the last thing I want to do after our quote block is we want to add an event. So we can do .add and we can pass in the event. And this is just so when this thing instantiates, we actually call that quote fetched event. So there we are calling the event. And again, there's the event. And over here, it's listening for that event. And when that event happens, it's going to do this and update our state. So that's kind of the flow that's happening here. Then what we need is, it would be right here. So we need to do child, and this is child of block provider. And this is where we would use our quote list as a child. So let's see if some stuff even happens. Now it's not going to show anything, but we might get a bit lucky. Let's refresh here and see if anything is even happening. Okay, so we're here, widget build. See if I missed anything. Oh yeah, no, there's still more stuff that has to happen before we're actually gonna make a network call. Okay, so we've kind of set this up. Then we have our quote list, and let's go down here. So in our quote list, we're going to keep everything we've done kind of the same so far, but we want to add one more property. This will be a late property, so not final, not const, not var, and it is of type quote block, and we're going to call it quote block. Awesome. So now we can reference this. Then in our init state, we have our super.init state, but we want to take our quote block, and we want to be equal to context.read of type quote block. So, and this is how we kind of connect the dots. Oops, we do not need a K there. And the other thing we want to do is, and we already had this function earlier, it's just going to be a little bit different, is our paging controller. We want to add that page request listener with page key. And instead of kind of calling that thing we made, we're actually going to go quote block dot add quote fetched. So this is just setting a listener, and before we were kind of like doing that thing where we'd do that fetch page, which appends, the page and all that kind of stuff. This is just going to fire this event, this quote fetched event, anytime it needs to. Another thing we want just for for some stuff. Let's do our dispose override, void dispose. So when this gets disposed, we obviously need to call super.dispose, but before that, we're gonna go and I think we can do paging controller.dispose. And I don't think we have to do anything with the quote block. Let me see if there's like a dispose on it. There's not, no. I don't think we have to do anything with that. So that'll be fine. Okay, lastly, so we sort of have our page view here, which is fine. I'm gonna keep it kind of down there, but we kind of have to wrap this in a few things. So I'm just gonna start it from start. So we need a block listener now. This will be listening to our state, and we need to tell Dart what this is. It is a type quote block, and specifically the kind of state, quote state. And we have a listener function, and that takes context and state. So this is where we'll have access to this right here. Pretty sweet. And inside this function, in this listener, there's a few things we want to do. So first of all, let's go if state.status is equal to API request status dot success. So when there's a success, we might want to do things, we're going to do things differently. So now we're going to check if state.page is equal to state.pages. So if we're on, page 10 of 10, we are going to do this lovely thing that we've already done before, paging controller dot append last page. And we're going to take whatever's in our state and look, appended quotes. And we want to use not just quotes, because that would be our whole list. We only want to append onto our page the additional quotes. Now, there's a little bit of an issue here, and that's because when we created in that example, when we created our page, we were saying it's a string. This is actually going to be now a quote model, which we have to import, and then that should go away. Okay, so we have that. Otherwise, so if we're not on the last page, we can just go paging controller dot append page, and we're going to do state dot appended quotes, same as before. And then the next page key is going to be state whatever page we're on now, +1. And that's our listener. Now, and I can just make this a bit cleaner. Nope, that's not where I meant to put that. There. Now we're getting errors down here, but that's because we're not quite done. Okay, so now there will be, we have a listener, but we also want a child of this block listener. Otherwise, we can't show anything. So it's going to be a block builder. And this is, I could see if you're coming into this, you've never done block before, you're probably like, this is so confusing. Honestly, once you kind of have like a sense of how it all fits together, there's a lot of copying and pasting you can do. It's not, I have something up for reference right now. I'm not just like, I don't have this all in my head. Like I know exactly what I'm doing. So once you kind of figure out the pattern and stuff, it's pretty easy to work with. Builder, we want to pass in, when you have a builder, we have access to context, and we also have access to, again, state. So this is much like the listener. In fact, I can even call it the same. But instead of just adding a listener, we're actually going to be building something, returning some UI. And here we're going to do a switch statement. I don't think we've done a switch statement before in this project yet, but it's kind of like a fancy way of doing if else. We can essentially look at switching on the status. And let's do a case for if we have API request status.failure, for instance. Here we just probably want to return like some centered text with a child of error. Obviously, we can make that prettier. We could do lots of cool things there. Secondly, we can have a case for API request status dot success. And when that's the case, that's where we essentially are going to return what we've just built. Sweet, but I want to wrap this in something else. I actually want to return a refresh indicator. And I mean, I like when it does that, but sometimes I don't. And let's just do an on refresh function, and I'm just going to refresh. What can I do? I'm just going to, for now, because we're just going to return future.sync. And inside that function, we're going to do something that we haven't got to yet. But we also want to pass in a child. And the child will be essentially what we have already made here. So let's grab this whole guy here. And I basically grab it from there, erase that return, put in that child, get rid of that semicolon, save so it lines up. And we do have to change, instead of this being string, it is now a quote model. And now it knows it's a quote model, so it should know that we could say quote. Oh, look at that, quote.dialog. We could actually, have something there. All right, and then see the squiggly? It's because our switch statement, it knows that there's no, it's missing something for initial. It's very, it's being very helpful to us. So let's handle initial. And in fact, we could do initial. We could also just do default, which will kind of catch any other things, any other cases. So instead of case, we can actually just write default. And in this case, we're going to return a center child of circular progress indicator, just like that, because it means, generally would mean that something's loading, and we can make this constant because there's no parameters in here. Okay, let's refresh and let's see if this even works. So it's spinning. Okay, we got an error. That's interesting. Let's go to our opening network tools. This network inspector, I kind of want to I love Flutter. I love VS Code. I feel like this thing needs some extra love though. For instance, sometimes just things don't show up. Like right now, although that could be our fault. Oh no, stuff is showing up. My biggest peeve is none of this stuff's copy and pasteable. You can't, unless there's like a new change they made, I can't copy this, which is like really annoying. Okay, so that's fine. We made an API call. It is hitting the one API.dev v2/quote page 1. So this looks good to me. If we go to our response, false, unauthorized. That's because I don't think I put my API token in. So I'm going to just pause for 1 sec because I don't want to spread my API token online, because if many people use the same one, it becomes a problem. But basically, you're just going to want to go, if you are following along, you're going to want to go into your API repository and make sure that that is up to date. Before I change it, actually, this is what I mean. I just kind of put in bearer, my API token here. You're going to want to change this with your token. I'm going to do that now, and I'll be back. All right, all I did was switch that API token to my proper one, and it just started working. So I'm sorry you missed the fun. But yeah, basically what's happening is it's calling this, and if we scroll down, now I haven't tested this part yet, so bear with me. I'm going to scroll faster. You'll see more things. It kind of loads for a sec, and it looks like different ones are coming in, which is great. So that's awesome. That is a bunch of work to get this, and of course, don't get me wrong, there's way easier ways to do this without using block. We could have just on this screen just called that endpoint right there and boom, done. This would have been a 10-minute video, but we're using block on purpose because there's going to be more resources. There's going to be ways to connect the dots between these things. I'm trying to identify these, these patterns and everything of how this type of programming works. Lastly, before to finish out this video, I kind of want to make use of this refresh. So say, for whatever reason you wanted to refresh, this is a pretty static API, so it's not really required, but on many APIs, you'd want to be able to refresh. So we're going to do some stuff for that too. In this thing that we sort of started to make, we just kind of have this on refresh function. So what we actually want to do on refresh is two things. We're going to take our paging controller and we want to call refresh on it. But immediately after, we're going to take that quote block and we're going to dispatch a new event. And this time it's going to be not quote fetched, but quote reset fetched. If we were to do anything now, it's not going to do anything different. It kind of does. It erases everything because of that refresh, but it's not working to the way that we want because we haven't done anything with this yet. So we have this stubbed out, and in fact, we don't even have to add any code to it. It's just really right now, just a fancy way we can define the difference between these things in our code. But essentially, what we want to do is add some stuff here. So if it's a quote reset, I always spell yield wrong, by the way, and we're going to call this something else, map. reset fetch quotes to state, and we're going to pass in state again. Now we don't have this function yet, so it's complaining at us, but we will get there. So let's make this function here, and it's very similar to what we did before. It's a future quote state. We'll paste that guy in, and it's going to take quote state again called state, and it's async. It should be async. Yeah, right. I was like, it needs to have a star, but no, it's only this one is the one where the yield actually happens, so that's why you need that star there. Okay, now within here, essentially, we could write out this same logic again, but we know when we're resetting, it's only ever going to be for the first page, so we don't have to worry about having all this. Instead, what we can actually do is we can make something called final, and I'm just going to call it new state. That's going to be equal to state.copyWith. And what I'm basically doing is clearing that state out. So I want to make status equal to API request status dot success, sure. And then I want to set quotes just to an empty array, and same with appended quotes to an empty array, and change page back to 0. These are kind of like the defaults that we have in our state anyways. Page is to 0. Then I don't want to return this. I want to actually return an await of map fetched quotes, that other function that we have, and pass in this new state. And what that's going to do is it's going to call this right here, which it knows, okay, it's going to here, and it's going to essentially, because we're passing in all of these things, it's going to use that wiped version before it actually creates this. So just a nice, easy way to do all this. And let's see if that even works. Not quite working, although this API can be a bit slow, so it is possible that we're getting rate limited or slow. Let's refresh. But I could definitely be missing one tiny dot here. Okay, so we get our original, that's fine. When I go to refresh, it doesn't look like it's, oh, it's making the call, okay. It's hard to see all this. Let me close some stuff. Close, 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 close. Okay, what did this last one do? It did page 2. That could have just been the pagination from the other one, though. We did get a response back. Okay, so there's one little thing missing. All right, I did get it working again. I just kind of restarted some stuff. I actually don't know what was wrong, but it is working. You'll see we have a bunch of stuff. We can get more pages, and we can go back to the top and kind of go like this, and it will restart it from scratch, and we're back here. So everything's good, and we're great. Now, a couple little things before we wrap this up. We have this quote, and we're going to be showing quotes in multiple places. So we're actually going to just make a new model, or new component. I'm going to make a new folder, not in there, but within lib, called components. And inside here, we're going to call this, I'll call it quote card dot dart. It'll be a stateless widget called quote card. We will import material. And we want to have a final quote model called quote. And we're going to make it required, so I'm going to put it first here, this dot quote. It will be required because it's not in curly braces and it's not in square braces. And for now, let's just let's just do it. We're going to make a card. Inside there, we're going to have text, so child with text, and it's going to be quote.dialog. And then I'm going to wrap the text actually in a padding, just so stuff looks nice and spread out. Then back over here, instead of just writing our text in all this padding, let's just return a quote card with quote. It's complaining because we got to import this. And sometimes with state stuff, oh, okay, no, it did work. Sometimes you have to kind of do a little green arrow reload. So we're pretty good here. One other thing I want to do, and this is just by the fault of the API we're working with, there's some weird stuff where sometimes there's these extra spaces. So we're going to go to our quote model, and we're going to create a getter on this. I'm going to put it right here. We're going to call it dialog normalized, I'll just call it. And what we want to return is whatever our dialog is, but we're going to do a replace all on, and what I've noticed is sometimes there's 4 spaces. I think it's like supposed to be a tab character. And anytime there's 4 spaces in a row, we're going to replace with that. And then in our quote state, or sorry, in our quote card that we just made, instead of just calling the dialog, we're going to call dialog normalized. And you'll see that you'll kind of get rid of some of those spaces, and it's just better. It's just better that way. Let's do a refresh to get it from the start. Diego, yeah, less. And that's just because that the API we're working with isn't the best. That would be if you had control of the API, it'd be better if you just dealt with it at the API side, but whatever. Okay, we're just an hour in, so this is good. We're going to call it quits on this. In the next video, what I'm going to do in between this video and next video is duplicate these efforts that we've just done for quote, and I'm going to make it for the movie model and the character model. It's something we could do over the stream, but it's mostly just a lot of copy and paste and changing names and that kind of stuff. So rather than wasting time having people watch me do that, I'm just going to take care of it, and then I'll do a quick walkthrough of what happened. But it will essentially be a one-to-one. We're going to have a whole new folder with these sort of things. So there'll be movie and character. And we're going to create the other screens, but they're going to behave the exact same way, more or less. All right, so see you next time after I finish that.